A movie that everyone knows about. You know, it's one of the most iconic movies ever for a reason. I remember not long after we met. Matter of fact, I think it might have been the very first day. It was not long before we started talking about how great Jaws was. And now, Anthony, I want to know. I've never actually asked this before. How did you discover Jaws? Like, what's the story between you and Jaws?
Oh, geez. Well, I was very far too young when I saw it. I remember because I was still being like babysat by my grandfather. He would come over every week and he'd watch me and my brother. And if I was pretty young back then, and I remember watching it with him for the first time.
Hmm.
And I remember being pretty startled and shocked, and I remember being confused, like just stay out of the water, people.
You
But
know what?
yeah,
How old were what are we talking here? Like six,
I
7 years old, maybe?
I'm gonna go with yeah, it's probably 7 years old,
So
and
7-year-old
yeah,
Anthony was smarter than the majority of the characters in this movie.
yeah, and then as I grew older and started watching it more and getting that was years before I got into actual enjoying filmmaking.
Hmm.
I'm like, oh, so this movie is actually brilliant, and it's more than just stay out of the water, people.
Yeah, there's a lot going on in this. I remember I first came to it much later in life than almost everyone else. I want to say I was maybe 15 years old when I first saw Jaws. For whatever reason, it had just eluded me up until that point. I was sheltered, might be the wrong word, but I was certainly not allowed to see adult content.
Well,
Like it
it's
was.
it's rated PG. Come on, man.
Yeah, it's rated PG in 1975. Jason and I just talked about Gremlins last week and how that almost single handedly led to the creation of the PG-13 rating. So this predates that by 9 years. And yeah, it's certainly not an R movie, but of course, there was no PG-13 at the time. And so for that reason, I guess for whatever reason, they don't have the power to retroactively go back and change ratings, do they?
I don't think so. I don't think that's how the MPAA works.
Yeah. They give a movie a rating when it first comes out, and that's it. Set in
That's the
stone.
rating.
Interesting. Yeah. So it is a PG movie. And honestly, there's only like a few things that really differentiate it between PG and PG-13. And a lot of it is just the visceral nature of it, like the actual
The
as
gore.
as sparse as they are. Yeah, the gore. I think specifically the conclusion of the movie gets very violent, very bloody.
Whatever could you be talking about?
Oh, you'll see once we get there. But suffice it to say, blood is shed, and not just human blood. There's various types of creatures involved. And yeah, so all that is to say that I just had never seen it until I was about 15, and then it was that classic thing where I kept hearing about it. I knew of it, but I had never actually seen it. And then that came up organically one day. And my stepdad was appalled at me for having never seen Jaws. And I was like, well, hey, we got technology at our fingertips. Let's check it out. And we watched it. It was my stepdad and my mom and I, and life was never the same. And I think I've seen it like 5 or 6 times since. And have only grown to
That's
appreciate
it.
it more every single time. Yeah, I know. I sort of I don't usually make a habit of watching movies that I like over and over again
Oh,
because
I do.
I know, yeah, and some people do, and that's awesome. And I actually wish I had that skill because a lot of it has to do with this weird paranoia I have of not liking movies as much. Like I'll purposely keep them away from me. Like I'll distance myself from them. Like it's been half a decade since I've watched Raiders of the Lost Ark, and I'm like, well,
Wow.
why watch it now? Let's see how long I can go. Like it's this weird part of my brain that I just sort of feel like keeping things at a distance. This is not true for every movie, of course. I recently talked about Monty Python and the Holy Grail, a movie I think I've seen 30 something times. So
Oh,
there are
geez.
certainly exceptions, but a lot of the time I will sort of go with the slow savoring of something as opposed to consuming it voraciously over the
Oh, I'm
course
sure
of
there's a lot of
many
value
years.
to that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm curious to hear how we perhaps look at it differently. But yeah, so Jaws is it's sort of pointless to really go into what it is. You know, everyone knows what it is. There, it's the 4th of July, Amity Island. There's a shark that has, to quote Richard Dreyfuss, staked its claim in the waters off of Amity Island, and it's got to be taken care of. And the real villain of the movie is the shark. Obviously, it's a threat. It's out there. It's endangering lives and livelihood of this island. But really, the thing that, especially this time, watching it in early September of 2020, made me realize this is maybe the most relevant movie ever 45 years later, completely inadvertently. The real villains of this movie is the mayor, played by Murray Hamilton, who
Those pesky politicians.
Oh my gosh. It is so, for the longest time I watched this movie, and there's a scene early on where it's the first, not the first shark attack, but the second one, the little Kintner boy, where we just see the fin for a second, like roll over in the ocean. There's this geyser of blood, and then everyone runs into the ocean. And for the longest time, I was so weirded out by that. I'm like, no one would ever do that. And I watch it now, and I'm like, I stand corrected, Steven.
Yep.
People do not regard threats. Like, this movie has been brought up a lot in the past couple of months in the way that it sort of is eerily similar to what's been going on for
open the beaches
most of the year now. Exactly. Yeah. They're just so insistent on keeping that capitalistic train going that it's not until, to use a current phrase that I was thinking about, it's not until a second wave, a second spike comes that they actually start to take it seriously. And so I'm curious if history is gonna parallel Jaws even more than that. Anthony, I know you've seen it many times. Did you rewatch the movie for this?
I rewatched it earlier today.
Very nice, as did I. Yeah, and were you having the same thought about how it's sort of eerily, like, really accurate to what's been going on a lot?
Yeah, I did. And the same with another Spielberg movie, Jurassic Park, like opening something that's, many experts tell you not to open it. And then you open it when it's not ready to be opened. And then you know what? People get eaten by sharks and or dinosaurs and or viruses. So, there's that.
I'm a lot more, I will say this, I still think most of the movies by and large are bad. I'm a little tiny wee bit more forgiving of the Jurassic Park franchise as a whole, because for the longest time I was like, why do they keep reopening the park? It turns out danger doesn't really matter to a lot of people, or to the ones in charge at least.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting movie to bring up. I hadn't thought of that specifically in this context. And yeah, it was weird. I was watching Jaws this morning, and I found myself critiquing the movie because of things that I didn't think were accurate. Like, it was as if the movie were made today, and I was like, well, that's not really a reflection of anything. Like, what's with the first shark that they catch? That doesn't reflect anything. It wasn't until I thought that in my head that I realized, wait a second, this movie is 45 years old.
Exactly.
It's that accurate that when it's not, it's distracting, and you think, what the hell, movie? Come on. So yeah, we're sort of jumping around a little bit, but let's talk about the cast of this movie. So we got Roy Scheider as Chief Brody. We got Richard Dreyfuss as Matt Hooper, or as Quint says, Hooper, which is a lot of fun. And of course, we have Quint, played by Robert Shaw, survivor of the USS Indianapolis. And I'm curious to hear your take on this, because for the longest time, for as long as I can remember, which granted is only about half a decade now, I've sort of looked at this movie, at these three characters, and by extension, the mayor a little bit, Mayor Vaughn. I've looked at them as sort of different personifications of traditional male archetypes. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. So I'm curious, have you ever looked at it that way, or do you think that they're more universal than that?
I have not looked at it in the archetypal way of looking at it. I've always admired the script of this movie. How these three guys are they all have a specific goal in mind,
Hmm.
and they all have their own separate ways of getting to that goal. And so maybe I'm thinking of it subliminally in the archetypal way, but I was thinking of it of just like representative of kind of like, how would you handle this? Who would
Yeah.
you be if you're on the boat, Sam? Which one are you? You know,
Hmm.
that kind of thing.
That's a good question. I would say, oh wow, I'm definitely not Quint because I'm just not. I think almost only Quint is Quint. But I think if we're looking at it in that sort of archetypal sense that I was mentioning earlier, you got Chief Brody, who's sort of the righteous sort of lawman, but not in like sort of a like a John Wayne kind of way where it's just driven by vengeance or anything. Like he legitimately wants to do the right thing. All of them legitimately want to do the right thing, but it's the way that they go about it which makes their characters so interesting. And I love the way how we see throughout the entire movie, but especially in the second half, which takes place on the boat, we see how they each have their specialty and they each have something they're good at that none of the others are, and they come to blows over it, they clash with each other over it, and that is what makes it so satisfying to see when they're starting to work together. You know, I think of the first scene where they tie off the barrel and shoot it. Like it's really close, it's really tense, but also they're clearly working as a team and they're putting faith in each other. And that's really good to see. It's good to see a team in a movie that have their differences but also respect each other and they don't define themselves by those differences. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think the relationship they have in the movie is really interesting and fun to watch.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you have, but I've read the book, and
Mm.
it is wildly different in
That's
the
what I've
book.
heard.
Yeah, and I can talk about it as we go. But in the book, they're all constantly at odds, and they don't like each other. And
Interesting.
I think the movie is just, I think the way it paces out their relationships and their interactions, it's believable, it's fun, it's dramatic, and
Mm.
I love it.
It's we could go on and on about just every great thing about this movie. Yeah, and it's wonderful to see them sort of, oh, what's the phrase I'm looking for? Sort of come closer together in the midst of this crisis, ultimately resulting in, of course, the conclusion of this movie. Now we are, as you could probably gather, we're going to assume you've seen the movie because, to be fair, you probably have. It doesn't make a lot of sense to sort of keep this one a secret. Um, I remember the one thing I know for a fact from the book, because I read this earlier today, that is different from the movie is that in the book, Matt Hooper, Richard Dreyfuss's character, has an affair with Chief Brody's wife. Is that right?
Yeah, like 4 chapter affair, and it's so
Oh
boring.
gosh.
And like 4 out of 14 chapters are devoted to
Oh really?
Ellen being horny for Hooper, and it's just not. Yeah, the movie is. I can't go on enough about how much better the movie is in the book, but there are a lot of good elements in the book that I enjoy.
Interesting. I'm curious to hear about it. Yeah, so let's just sort of go through it. So we have the opening scene where it's late at night, it's at the campfire, a lot of teens probably indulging in certain substances late at night on the beach around the bonfire, and two of them run off, and the guy is just too drunk to keep going, and the girl goes into the ocean and gets eaten by a shark. There's your movie right there. What a
Boom.
fantastic opening. And it really sets the bar early on of just how scary the ocean is. You'll notice most of this movie is set during the day. And that brings me to a question I had that it's not the most relevant thing, but I'm curious where you stand on it. Anthony, is Jaws a horror movie?
I think a lot of people would consider it a horror movie, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I would.
Yeah.
I mean, it's certainly a thriller,
Yes.
but
Absolutely.
is it scary? Are you scared by this movie? Because like a ghost story, a ghost can get you in your house, on the street, wherever. But
Right.
how can you be scared of a shark if you live in Colorado, as I do? And it
Uh,
just, but I don't know. Maybe it is a horror movie because 7-year-old me was very scared of sharks. Like they're gonna get me if I go to the bathroom.
there you go. I mean, hey, Where else are they going to get you? Yeah, that it's. I think you're right. I think it is easy to see both sides of it. I would say it is a horror movie, but for a different reason than most horror movies. Like when you first hear the word horror, it's scary for a different reason. You know what I'm saying now? I don't know about you, but I wouldn't call it a phobia, but I definitely do not care for the ocean. And if I never go into it again, I would be
Oh, I'm with
perfectly
you.
happy.
I'm
Yeah.
with you.
There is something about the ocean, just this inky black void that we know almost nothing about, that it takes up most of the planet, and yet it is a complete mystery. It is a place where, if without the proper protection and equipment, we could very easily die, even just from being underwater for more than like, I don't know what the exact time is, 4 minutes. There's just this mystery to it, and the fact that you can't see anything in most of the oceans of the world, at least, that's really scary to me. I remember, I think it was 2013, I was at the beach, the biannual vacation that my family takes. I was walking along the shoreline, and suddenly I felt the sharp pain in my foot, as if something had punctured the sole of my foot. I lift up my foot. Sure enough, there's a pair of rusty scissors sticking out of my foot.
Oh my god! I thought you were gonna say like you stepped on a jellyfish or something.
Oh, I wish. I would have loved to have stepped on a jellyfish.
Oh jeez.
No, I had to go home. I had to get tested for tetanus immediately, and I had to walk on this wound for several days. And since then, I have not set foot in the ocean. I'm like, nope, not for me. You have no idea what's in there. So much of the world's trash and refuse has gone into that place, and there's no way to tell where it's all gone. It is this scary void of mystery, and I don't care for it.
Oh, I'm with you. I've been in the ocean once when I was maybe 10 years old. Didn't go more than knee deep. I
Yep.
was like, there. I had seen Jaws at that point. There are sharks out there, and whenever people tell me like, why don't you just go to the beach? I'm like, I think of this comedy bit from Brian Callen
Mm.
where people are saying it's rare, it's so rare that shark attacks them, and he goes, where you are, it's rare. Where I am on land, never. So like, makes sense to me.
Yeah, that's true. Why not? Why risk getting murdered by a sea creature? You know,
Exactly.
I think there are that. You know what I like? Landlocked states. That's where I live.
Hmm.
That's where I breathe, and that's where I thrive. I think the ocean is one sort of fear I have. The other one, weirdly enough, also related to the ocean, I have this recurring nightmare where a tsunami destroys everything, which is bizarre because I live in Colorado. It makes no sense to be scared of tsunamis, but alas, here we are. And the third one I have, and this is a total tangent, but I just feel like saying it, I have a fear of getting electrocuted because I was briefly electrocuted when I was like 13 years
Oh,
old.
geez.
And it was not fun. And I'm like, okay, so now I'm intensely careful. Like I have this weird skittishness of wall outlets. So if you ever want to scare me, bring a wall outlet and I'll be really terrified.
Your worst nightmare is toasters in the ocean. Jeez.
It really is though. I am really careful with toasters and all sorts of I almost said medical. I have no idea why. Electrical appliances. So yeah, little tangent, but regardless. And yeah, we hear that John Williams score, and it is a mystery under there. You can't see it, and what's in there wants to kill you and everyone else. And it's really serious right off the bat. And I really like that. And I love the way that the movie just gets going. Like it doesn't feel the need to sort of introduce what's going on with everyone, what they're, where they are. We find that out organically as the story goes along, when really what we're focusing on is this beach that needs to be closed. And that's when we meet Chief Brody, who is really personable in this movie. I've always loved Roy Scheider in this role. There's a little moment that means nothing at all, but I really love seeing it every single time. It's when they're first going to investigate the corpse of the girl who washed up on the beach. And if you look closely, there's a scene where Chief Brody sort of like slips on some sand and almost falls. And that's just not something that you see a lot of heroes do. They sort of have this swagger about them, this perfection, this impenetrability that everything they do is right. That is so refreshing to see the alternative here. There's a lot of doubt on Brody's part throughout the entire movie. Is that something that you've connected with as you've seen this, Anthony?
Oh yeah, I was just thinking today how different it is to see, especially a movie from that time when like kind of cop movies and cop shows were on the rise. Mm-hmm. This is a cop movie, and he's a cop, and he it's not about catching criminals. It's not about vengeance on the guy, he stole my daughter or anything like that. It's his job is to protect people, and if he's got to close the beaches, he'll close the beaches. That sounds very anticlimactic, but that's what his job is, and it's very captivating to see Roy Scheider in that part. And I think he's very down to earth and relatable, and I love it.
Yeah, one of the greatest moments is after the second attack when he realizes, like, I should have insisted on it, I didn't, and now 2 people are dead. When poor Alex Kintner's mom just, oh my gosh, I can't even imagine, goes up to him and says, "You knew," and he's like legitimately remorseful to the point where Mayor Vaughn is trying to talk him out of it, like, don't listen to her, and he's like, no, she's literally exactly right. And I was very irresponsible to give in to essentially the peer pressure of everyone. Like, there's that town meeting where we get just a bunch of characters. My favorite one is the woman with glasses and sort of curly hair is like, I don't think that's funny at all. Like, I've always just thought something was really funny about
Are you going to close the beaches?
Exactly, yeah. It's in the car, the yard, or whatever. And yeah, that's another thing I really love about this movie that I just notice more and more every single time, how you really get a sense of community on this island. You get every character that has a speaking line really sets themselves apart. There are the classics. There's there's the ones we've already mentioned. My personal favorite and my brother's personal favorite is after they catch that tiger shark and they're like, well, what kind of shark is it? And Richard Dreyfuss goes, it's a tiger shark. And the guy turns and goes,
a what? Yeah.
Which is just a brilliant delivery. That's all you need. That entire character is formed right there. It reminds me of, and granted, this went on much, much longer than the runtime of Jaws, but it reminds me of that tight-knit community of recurring characters in The Simpsons, how you know them immediately. They all have their personality. They don't even need to be there for longer than a few seconds, but you know who they are. There are a lot of movies like that. To Kill a Mockingbird is another one. And it's something that's really impressive. And not a lot of filmmakers take the time to create those one sentence characters, those bit roles.
Yeah, it's really smart casting.
And yeah, so we see immediately, like, they're going to work, and Chief Brody goes to like an arts and crafts store, which I love, and takes the paintbrush out of the thing and knocks it over, like a hero in a movie does. That's another one of my favorite moments. And yeah, just gives into the pressure and opens the beaches. And then he's there on the beach watching everyone, just waiting for something to happen. And sure enough, it does. And it's really horrific. And you get that just iconic, really dramatic zoom in shot that is really just strange looking. The way that they do that is by moving the camera closer to the actor while simultaneously zooming out, or maybe it's the other way around, but it creates this weird effect where the background gets closer and closer, like it sort of compresses the frame while everything stays the same size. So it's really impressive.
I've heard it called the Jaws shot. I've heard it called the Hitchcock zoom, because I guess Hitchcock did it. He did it in Vertigo or something.
Yeah.
And it's a cool shot. Cameras are wild, aren't they? I love them.
They are really wild. Yeah. And that's and the rest of the movie pretty much gets going. Like, we could sort of talk about each moment specifically, but let's sort of jump around a little bit. What is, let's say before the boat, before they get on the boat and go out to sea, what's a moment that you find yourself connecting with time and time again as you watch this movie? What's a moment or like maybe a set piece or a scene or an interaction or something? What do you got, Anthony?
I mean, it's one of my favorite scenes in the movie. It's certainly my favorite scene on land. It's right before Hooper shows up at Brody's house, and Brody's just sitting at the table. He's
Yeah.
distraught, and he's got his hands on his face, and his son, who's his youngest son, who's probably like, I don't know, 4,
Yeah, something like that.
is like mimicking his hand motions. And when he moves his hand, the son moves his hand. When he puts his hands over his eyes, his son puts his hands over the eyes. They make funny faces. And I think that scene's certainly not in the book. I think that is all Spielberg right there.
Oh, yeah.
I think that tenderness of that scene, it lets you know so much of what you need to know about Brody as a person, his motivations, and then Hooper shows up, and then he gets drunk, and it's a you can just see the gears turning in that whole scene, and that's one of my favorite scenes.
Yeah, you're absolutely right that it's a Spielberg moment. I'm trying to think of another director that would go out of their way to put something like that in a movie. Sure, there are, sentimental directors, for lack of a better word, but it's just that sort of unnecessary moment of humanization. And you have to remember, this scene is immediately following what we mentioned a couple of times so far, right after the little Kintner boy dies. So he's feeling immense regret and remorse, and that he's connecting with his own child in this moment of, I really have to do something because this cannot go on. That's really powerful. And then I just love the moment right afterwards where he's like, now get out of here. Like, as if to say, there's adult stuff now. We got to figure out what's going on. And then Richard Dreyfuss shows up. We haven't talked a lot about Richard Dreyfuss, who provides a lot of the comic relief in this movie. I think probably my favorite joke in the movie, the funniest part. Every single time it gets a laugh out of me. Actually, 2. And one of them is, I think, meant to be funny, and one of them I find funny for some weird reason. The first one is when they go out after slicing open that first shark. They realize this isn't it. We got to, let's go out and see if we can find it. And they're just sort of talking. And Brody's like, so where'd you get this boat? And Hooper's like, oh, I bought it. What, are you rich? Yeah. just that Dreyfuss delivery of, oh yeah, I'm rich. Like, he clearly just has no bones about it. And I love knowing that the way that bit of dialogue works out in retrospect. It's sort of funny to go back and see when he first shows up and is getting just all this guff sort of by, the people on the island, like, okay, they're college boy. They're all gonna die. Okay. Yeah. Like, he really doesn't care what they think. And I like that about him. I admire that in a character. The other moment, and I'm just going to jump right to the end. It's after the shark blows up and Richard Dreyfuss, who's been presumed dead, who's been out of the action, just sort of swims to the surface and is like, hey, what'd I miss? There's something about that I always just, I just crack up watching it every single time, because that is so Hooper right there. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's like, where you been, buddy?
Yeah, I just swam to the bottom of the ocean and sat it out until I heard an explosion noise, and here I am. So I like to think that's exactly what was going through his head. Yeah. So we've got the first death on the beach. We've got the moment. We got them. Oh, here's something I want to mention. So the idea of the jump scare is something that has kind of been beaten into the ground, and it didn't take long. It is just this really, for lack of a better, it's a word that gets tossed around a lot, but it's just this really lazy way of sort of making sure the audience is paying attention. Like, scary, right? Please say that we're scary. And I am never a fan of it. I think it's the worst in those Conjuring movies, because the way it always happens is that, there's this quietness, there's maybe a dark spot on the screen. You can literally set your watch to it. It's a 1, 2, 3 jump scare, and then it plays this really loud sound effect that is just annoying more than anything, and I'm sick of it. I will say this right now. If I were to make a list of like the top 5 jump scares in movie history, Jaws would be at least 3 of them,
Yeah, definitely.
So we've got the we've got number one, which is the corpse floating out of the boat and scaring Hooper, and he drops the tooth.
That's Brent Gardner's head.
Yeah. Every single time I watch that, I defy myself. I'm like, okay, I'm not going to jump this time. I swear I won't. I know exactly when it's going to happen. I know exactly where it is. I know exactly what to expect. And it still gets me every time because it's just that effective. Just that.
Oh, yeah, me too.
Isolation of you're underwater. There's a shark around and there's this wrecked boat. And then just a guy floats out. There's just something really nightmarish about it, and the fact that it's a lot of it is the editing, that it cuts to the shot and then within a second the scare happens. So that's really effective. The second one is almost not even a jump scare because of how iconic the moment is, but it's right before you're going to need a bigger boat, throwing the chum into the water.
That is a great moment.
Oh yeah, it's so great. I heard this story and I was trying to figure out who told it, and I wasn't able to figure this out in time, but evidently there was a version of the script, because that line is not in the book, as I have.
Definitely not.
There was a version of the script. This was rewritten a lot, and one version had, okay, they're on the boat, they're throwing the chum out into the water, they're doing all the stuff, and then at one point there was a page of dialogue that was entirely crossed out with a pen or a marker or something. And then in the margins, really small, just said, you're going to need a bigger boat. It just communicates so much in that one little line. I don't know if you've heard that story, Anthony.
I have heard that story, yeah. Jaws has my favorite of all time behind the scenes stories. I love everything. I've seen every documentary there is about this movie.
I can't wait to talk about a few of those. And just to quickly mention the third jump scare, it's when Hooper's in the shark cage and it shows up. And that one, they really draw that one out, which I noticed this time. So that's really effective. So yeah, at least 3 of the top 5 horror filmmakers, I beg of you, either stop doing it or change your game, because I'm sick of jump scares. I know I sound like a crotchety old man right now, but
I'm with you.
Please do it for me.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of like Annabelle, the doll running through a door all of a sudden. I saw that.
Jesus. Actually, I will say this. One of the other top 5 jump scares is in the movie Deep Red. I'm not going to say what it is, but Jason and I talked about it a few months ago. And that if you want a good jump scare, watch that movie and you'll know when you see it.
Well, I haven't seen that, so I will see it.
Yeah, it's really good. I highly recommend it. But I digress. So we've talked about a lot of stuff. Is there anything else? Let's just say, is there anything else on the island before they set out on the boat that we haven't touched on yet that you wanted to bring up?
Oh, I don't think so. I think we covered everything that I want to talk about.
Yeah. There's one more thing I want to mention, and it's another moment that I just have always found so hilarious. I think it's after the first, I'm trying to remember exactly where it was. I think it's after the second death where, everyone knows there's a shark in the water, and those 2 guys late at night go out on the dock. Their whole plan is to take a chain with a big hook on the end of it, crudely skewer a big roast beast or something, throw it out into the ocean, and then what? I've always been baffled by this asinine plan of theirs, and it nearly gets them killed.
Yeah, just Abbott Costello just trying to catch a shark.
I guess so, yeah. So that's always made me laugh. And that brings me to a point that I want to bring up, and I think this will sort of transition into the second half. This movie is hailed a lot for being really, maybe it's scary, maybe it's iconic, maybe it's dramatic. Doesn't get talked about a lot for how funny it is. You know what I'm saying? Oh, yeah.
I think it's a hilarious movie.
Mm-hmm. I think we mentioned a few of the funny moments before, but there is, again, it's that honesty, it's that down-to-earthness of this movie.
Definitely.
That really makes way for these comedic situations. And of course, there are a lot that we haven't mentioned. We won't get to them all. But yeah, that's just something that I've always admired about this movie. And it sort of comes to a culmination, I think, in the scene that I want to talk about next, which is when they're comparing scars, when Quint and Hooper are sort of like showing off to each other. And it's a funny scene. They're clearly a little inebriated, and you see Brody just sort of looking on. Like there's a scene where he looks down the front of his pants. I don't know what that's about, but it's
Oh
just this
no,
funny visual.
they're bragging about their scars and all their stories, and all he had is like his appendix out, and that's like, oh, I can't brag about that.
Oh, that's okay. I must have missed that. Yeah. So
Yeah.
okay, that makes a lot more sense then.
Yeah.
um, but yeah, so there's this. It's just this scene where they really, for the first time, they connect. I think Quint and Hooper have been at odds this entire time. This is the first time when they really see each other and realize, like, yes, you know what, we just look at the world differently, and yes, it's going to make for conflict, but also it can make for just a lot of real humanity, and that's one of the greatest scenes of this movie, and I'm sure you concur.
Yeah, that scene, I think that's probably another Spielberg addition, because nothing like that in the book. In the book, it's Hooper is not likable. Quint's pretty much still Quint. Like Robert Shaw adds a lot, but Quint was on the paper as Quint, and that scene that scene wouldn't fit in the book. It wouldn't work in the movie. It's I don't know, that scene, like all of my favorite scenes don't even involve the shark. Like it's weird.
Yeah, that's freaking Spielberg, man. The way that he could just add charm to any movie is really uncanny.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, you just mentioned it. We might as well talk about it. There is, of course, one of the things that Jaws is most famous for is the way that it builds terror without actually showing the monster. And of course, this was an accident, which is so amazing to think about. Like, what kind of butterfly effect universe would we have lived in if the animatronic shark had worked just fine? Would the movie, I'm sure it wouldn't be as good, but would it have even been a hit? Who knows how much difference that little change made, you know?
Oh yeah, I've seen like the storyboards of the original plan, and like the shark's in a lot of the movie. He's in the whole opening with Chrissy. He's under the boat. He's attacking the boat, and I just can't imagine how there'd be so much less suspension.
Yeah.
Than I think there is without the shark. It's so much better, which is weird to say.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm not exactly sure how true this is. I really should have looked it up, but I remember hearing at one point that the yellow barrels full of air that they shoot into the shark with a harpoon wasn't in the movie initially. They had to add that as a way of being able to visualize the shark, the way it sort of drags it around the surface of the water. That's how we know it's there, because we can't actually see it. So and to think of the amount of suspense that those end up building at the end of the day is just all the more fascinating.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much right, because the barrels are in the book, but not until the very, very last chapter. And they're like a last ditch attempt to, okay, we got to stop the shark. So they're like, let's get some barrels. And then the movie does it. Oh, everything about the movie is better. I love it.
It really is. Yeah. So let's talk about this sort of second half of the movie as a whole. We've mentioned little bits and pieces, but Anthony, I want to ask you, what do you think is it? Let's just start with a basic question. What is it that makes this entire second half of the movie? I checked, it's not exactly half. It's closer to 50 minutes out of a 2-hour something odd movie, but for all intents and purposes, it's the second half.
Exactly.
What do you think it is about just this location and this task that they have that makes it so engaging throughout, so exciting to watch?
Well, I think it's the pacing, because it flows in a way that's there we go. No pun intended. It flows in a way that is natural and intense, and obviously in a thriller, you want to be thrilled, but
naturally.
Exactly. And I think a lot of times some of these slower moments between the characters are kind of forced in maybe a newer movie, because they're like, okay, well, we don't have the budget to show a big CGI shark every scene, so let's throw in some banter with the characters. But I think what makes this work is I'm just as happy watching the scenes with the shark as I am without the shark. I think everything works. I think the fact that they're out there the whole time, like in the book, they go back to port every time,
really?
like every day, and it messes with the pacing so much. They're like,
Oh,
okay,
wow.
we'll get back out here tomorrow. And like Brody goes home and has dinner. And like, I think the movie, that's the biggest change for me. How
Huh.
the pacing of the boat scenes is incredible. And there are some slow moments, but they don't feel slow, you know?
Yeah. There's sort of some downtime initially, and I like the way that it actually sort of builds in intensity gradually with, let's call them just like the shark encounters that sort of happen one at a time. And I really like the first one where they've got the line out going into the ocean. They're sort of just familiarizing themselves with the ship, and in turn familiarizing us. I shouldn't not the ship, the boat. In turn, familiarizing us with that, and we really get to know this small location really, really well. And then just sees a little like twang on the line, and it's like, oh Jesus, here we go. And I love the way that Quint just slowly hooks into the fishing rod, and then just like that, here we go. This is for real now, and that's really exciting. And then of course they encounter the shark a couple more times. Yeah, what you said just then about how a worse movie, let's call it, would just force in banter, that made my blood curdle a little bit.
Yep.
Just thinking about a movie like trying to force that kind of connection when it's not really there, because I'm thinking of a movie that would try to like improvise that kind of stuff, which just doesn't work as well. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right. The writing is really it's a good thing that I went through such a long writing process, because they really sharpened this into one of the better scripts I think ever made.
Oh yeah, I agree. I think they started shooting without a script even finished.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another one of my favorite stories. Like, this movie is just a miracle. Like, how is it so good? How did the boat not sink 100 times when they were filming? Like, it's crazy to me.
It really is, yeah. And of course they did end up going like way over schedule, right?
Oh yeah, way over schedule, way over budget.
But you know what? I think it worked out in the end.
Oh yeah,
To
made a
sort
few
of
bucks for the studio.
Yeah, I just want to bring that up real fast. So we all know that Jaws was a huge success, sort of created the blockbuster as we know it. Until I want to say about 6 or 7 years ago, not adjusted for inflation, it was still one of the top 50 highest grossing movies of all time. Like, that's how much this movie was made. And part of
Yeah,
that
it's
was
crazy.
because it was released differently from a lot of movies at the time, actually. What was happening, at least most of the time up until that point, was movies would be released in what was called a road show, where they would sort of come out in short bursts around the world or around the country or whatever. It wouldn't be released to the same to everywhere at the same time. And this was something that Jaws actually sort of pioneered. And so now that's, the very, very immediate present notwithstanding, that's how most movies are released, where it's just everywhere the same day. Maybe it's a few different, like a few weeks apart for different nations, but generally speaking, this movie really kind of created that and was immensely successful. So more than made up for all of the losses that it accrued along
Oh
the way.
yeah, wild success.
Yeah. But anyway, so to get back to the sort of third, or I guess second out of two acts of the movie, yeah, it really starts to get intense there, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, just more differences from the book. Hooper dies in the book,
Mm-hmm.
and not in a, and Quint does too, but not in quite the way he does in the movie. It's just the movie handles everything so, I don't know how to put it. Like, it's tight. It's
Yeah.
a tightly packed like third act,
Yeah.
and it's intense and it's
Mhm.
freaky and it's jarring just to see blood spurting everywhere, and it's weird. Like, I can't. It's really hard to think of other movies like this. It's just so I just can't get over Spielberg. He is my favorite director, and this movie is. He was so young when he did it, and I think it's just a perfect movie.
This is the best Spielberg movie, right? Can we agree on that?
I'd say so.
Yeah, I think it's really close. I'm a huge fan of Close Encounter of the Third Kind and Raiders of the Lost Ark. Those would probably be my 2 and 3. But man, there's just something about Jaws that is just so unassailable, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, just a couple of more things I want to mention. What you were saying about how that sort of tight conclusion, especially as things start escalating in urgency, not only because the shark is closing in, but because the boat is sinking, and that is
Yeah,
really impressive. That the way they're able to just at a very quick glance communicate, this is exactly how screwed we are right in this moment. The water
yeah,
level correlates to our screwedness, and so I
yeah.
think
Brody
that's really
Brody
impressive.
climbs up on that pole and he's jabbing at the shark with a stick.
Uh,
It's crazy.
I love how at one point just pulls out a gun, like as if
Yeah,
that's going to do anything.
yeah.
And
Take that little
sure,
revolver.
he does end up hitting the shark. I like to think it made no difference whatsoever, but it is
Probably not.
there. It shows the position that they're in. That listen, we have to do this. And something I really like about this movie is that we've got that first chunk of the movie in which it's sort of the debate of, do we close the beaches or not? In parentheses, yes, of course we effing do, but because the mayor,
Money.
this capitalist person who's just arbitrarily in charge and gets the final say on everything, because he doesn't wanna. That's pretty much all it is, because he doesn't wanna close the beaches. That's all we need. That's all we need to hear. Mayor doesn't want to. That's it. Reminds me of a certain someone that is running a certain nation that we happen to live in today. So just yet another connection to the world we live in now. But what I love is that when they finally make the decision to close the beaches, to hire Quint to go out onto the ocean and kill the shark, it takes like a day, it's 1 day, right? I'm not remembering that
Something like
incorrectly.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's they go out and then there's the night, like night falls and stuff, and then the next morning they kill the shark. So yeah, it's a day. That's all it takes. And granted, Quint doesn't get back alive, but also it shows that that kind of determination to make everything okay. You know what I'm saying? To get rid of the bad thing. That can go a long way. And all you really need is the ability to do it. And they did it. Dang it. And all they lost was a day worth of beach going, which is really cool. And one last thing that I want to specifically mention is a moment that really stuck out to me this time in a way that it never has before. And that is Quint's final moments, because we heard the story earlier of the USS Indianapolis, how their ship exploded. They were all in the water. They had not even reported in the mission that they were going on, which was to deliver the atomic bomb. And so they were stranded there for who knows how long. And the sharks were just picking them off one by one. And we hear just the vengeance in his heart. And it's a quick shot, but it's at the very end when the boat is being overturned and Quint slides into the shark's mouth. It is a phenomenal bit of acting by Robert Shaw. The way, with just the facial expression, the frantic kicking of his legs, you see his entire character right there. Like, everything that's going through his mind. It just, I don't know what it was about this moment specifically, why I'm focusing on it so much. It just really blew me away. That bit of acting right there. Has that moment ever stuck out to you?
Oh yeah. I remember after I started liking this movie when I was younger, I stopped watching it for a long time because Quint was my favorite, and I don't want to see Quint get eaten in half. That
Yeah.
is upsetting to me. And that scene is just, I don't know. That scene to me is because of the Indianapolis story. It feels like him and the shark are just connected in a way that obviously the shark is not actually after Quint because of who Quint is. He's just
Yeah.
after this thing who has a knife who's trying to kill me.
Yeah,
But
that's
it
some Jaws the
feels
Revenge stuff.
exactly. It feels like this is the sharks finally coming for Quint.
Mm-hmm.
Quint escaped the sharks back then, but they always catch up. And I don't know. That's obviously not how it is, but that's how it feels. And that scene is powerful. Like the blood spurting out of his mouth, and watching the jaws clamp on his torso, and he's flailing the machete. That scene is insane.
we see this guy who for the entire movie has been this really like working class macho dude, sort of in almost a what's in almost an over the top way at times. And
Yeah.
we see him staring death in the eyes, those dead eyes like a doll's eyes. And that's it. Like there's this weird poetry to it, you know what I'm saying? And I think what really puts a button on it is after Hooper floats to the surface and says to Brody, Quint, and Brody laughs and says no. And he's not laughing because he's happy that Quint's dead, even though they didn't necessarily get along 100% of the time. I almost take it to mean he's laughing as if to sort of acknowledge like it was kind of meant to be, you know, in like this almost morbid way. It just kind of, that's what was probably inevitably going to happen. You know what I'm saying?
Full circle. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I want to mention real fast. So is there, we've talked about a lot of stuff. Of course, we didn't mention everything. We could go on for a very long time. Is there anything else about Jaws that you wanted to specifically bring up?
I think we covered it all. Like it's one of my favorite movies of all time. It's Spielberg's one of his first movies ever, and it set him on the career that he had. And you know, thank God, because he's brought us so many incredible movies. Mm-hmm. And like I think this will always be remembered as his kind of number one. You know?
Yeah. Just the general consensus, this one has maintained, and it will maintain forever if the events of this year are any indication. I want to address this real fast. Jaws had 3 sequels that are all bad to varying degrees, but there is this debate out there about or not even a debate. There's the common perception that Jaws the Revenge is worse than Jaws 3. And Anthony and I are here right now to say that is absolutely not true. Jaws 3 is the worst Jaws movie by far.
Jaws 3D. Oh my God. Just it's atrocious.
Oh my goodness. I will never feel the need to watch any of those sequels again, unless it's for a podcast or something. I might do it, but even if that's the case, I legitimately might skip Jaws 3D. Like that is how pointless and empty that movie is. Jaws the Revenge, which I briefly mentioned a moment ago, is at least silly. It's bad. It's quite bad.
Oh, it is.
But
at least it has Michael Caine.
It's got Michael Caine hunting down a shark. And if that's not enough to at least earn it, 1 star.
I think that's what I gave it on Letterboxd. I think Christopher Nolan should do Jaws 5 with Michael Caine.
Jaws 5.
I'd watch that.
I would see it. Yeah, I really would.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah. And Jaws 2, it's meh.
It's got Roy Scheider. It's fun. It's not good, but
it's watchable, but barely.
Just barely.
It's got one of the funniest kills in movie history in it, though.
One of the first ones, right?
Yeah.
I'm
not going to give it away.
I know what you're talking about.
It's really funny.
Yeah.
So Anthony, what we do on Extra Milestone is we recommend similar movies to the ones we discuss, and I want to know right here at the end of our Jaws conversation, did you have a movie to sort of go along with Jaws in some way, whether it's literally, spiritually, in some weird tangential manner? What do you got?
So I tried to find one that I'm pretty sure you haven't seen. Creature from the Black Lagoon, 1954.
Yeah, I've missed that one. I've been meaning to get to it for so long. I've just never gotten to it.
I thought long and hard about how to compare anything to Jaws. Mm-hmm. But Creature from the Black Lagoon is pretty close because it's a thing under the water that's going after pretty women on top of the water. And there's a boat with kind of an ornery sea captain. And it's an adventure. It's meant to be a horror thriller. And I enjoy it a lot. It's one of my favorite of the, I think it's one of the Universal horror movies. I love it.
Yeah, it's in that sort of vein that started with Dracula, Frankenstein, The Mummy, The Wolfman, that kind of thing. Even though it doesn't actually connect to any of them, like there's no crossover material, but it is often considered part of the same milieu. I'm recalling in this moment, actually, back on an early episode of Anyway, That's All I Got, we were talking about the Oscars that year, early 2018, and the Shape of Water one. I remember
That's
you
right.
bringing up the comparison that Guillermo del Toro made with it.
I do remember. I do remember that conversation. How about that? Yeah. The Creature from the Black Lagoon. It's a pretty iconic suit and mask, and it's that. Similarly, they had a lot of similar problems shooting this. How do you get cameras underwater? How do you shoot underwater? The lighting, the sound, all that. It's filmmaking is crazy, isn't it? I love it.
It really is, yeah. It's one I've been meaning to get to for a really long time. I know a lot about it. I've just never actually watched it. Maybe now is as good a time as any. For my recommendation, usually I recommend a good movie, but I'm going to do something a little bit differently. So it has been well documented, and I didn't mention this earlier for a reason. So Jaws, as I mentioned, was an enormous critical success to the point where it spawned almost an unbelievable number of knockoffs in the following decades. I found this huge list on IMDb that was as comprehensive as it gets of Jaws knockoffs, and it was somewhere in the ballpark of 150. And a lot of them were directly in the wake of Jaws within 10 years of it coming out, and still continues to this day with stuff like Sharknado could be considered a distant relative of the Jaws knockoff. But there's this entire cinematic just corner of Jaws knockoffs. And what I'm going to do is there's one I'm going to focus on, but I compiled a list of some of my favorites. I actually haven't seen most of these, but I just want to read some of the funniest titles of Jaws knockoffs because it'll give you an idea of what this cinematic tradition was tapping into. We have Grizzly, Mako, the Jaws of Death, Squirm, Dogs, Eaten Alive, Claws, which is one of my favorite one.
I think I've heard of that one.
Claws is about like a bear, so that sounds fun.
Yeah, I think I've heard of that one.
There's Tentacles, which I really, if I had more time, I would have spent like a day or two just watching a bunch of these. Alas, I did not. The White Buffalo.
Oh, geez.
Day of the Animals, Empire of the Ants. Let's see, Kingdom of the Spiders, The Pack, Night Creature, The Swarm, which is actually very famous, Piranha, which is very famous as well, Barracuda, Nightwing, Crocodile, Alligator, the list goes on. But perhaps one of the most notorious ones is a movie, and I vaguely remember describing this to you at one point, but I'm curious if you'll remember, is a movie called Orca. Have you heard of this, Anthony?
I have heard of this, yes.
Orca is one of the worst movies ever made. And that is what makes it great. It is a movie about Richard Harris hunting down a killer whale that is feeling vengeful for whatever reason. And it's like, it's as if Quint was the main character, except wasn't as ornery, I would say.
Well, I mean, his boat is called the Orca.
It literally, yeah, and I think that's a direct reference.
Yeah.
And except it's the shark, or in this case the whale, has much more of a mind of its own to almost a ridiculous degree. It is hilarious to watch because of just how poorly conceived it is. There are a ton of scenes I could describe. I'm just going to describe the first one. There's a dinghy out in the ocean. A shark comes up, starts attacking it, and then a killer whale rams the shark out of the ocean onto dry land, and then the title comes up. It is letting you know right off the bat, this ain't no Jaws. This is Orca, by literally headbutting a shark out of the ocean, which whales don't do. And then there's a scene later on involving a whale fetus that I will not describe, but it is... the image is burned into my brain permanently, and it's so bad, but it's so much fun to watch. So watch Jaws and then immediately watch Orca. See the comparison. It's really, really, really funny.
Oh, I think I have to watch it now.
Yeah, I highly recommend it. I highly do.